Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode number 39 of Circle of Fellows, the monthly broadcast / podcast featuring a panel of IABC fellows addressing the editorial theme that IABC has selected for the month. This month, that theme is building strong brands, which leaves us lots of leeway for discussion with a great panel. And as ever, I am going to have you introduce yourselves left to right as I see you in the thumbnails at the bottom of the screen. That puts Cindy first.
I'm Cindy Schmieg, SCMP. Pleased to be here today. I have a background in marketing and communications. I have a degree in an MBA degree that focuses on communication. So, and I have over 30 years of experience corporately leading brands, having gone through several mergers and acquisitions where I led that emphasis, along with major name change, which was a really interesting case. I've also had some agency and consulting work where I worked on brand messaging projects, and currently I'm teaching marketing and communications classes for Southern New Hampshire's University's online communication graduate program.
Excellent. Next is Mark.
Hey there, this is Mark Schumann, and I feel like my work in brands goes all the way back to my childhood when my mother would only buy Heinz ketchup. But over the years, I have been very focused on the employee side of brand. Wrote a couple of books about the employer brand and how it connects to the external brand. Like Cindy, have taught, and I currently am the Vice President of Culture for Sabre Corporation here in the Dallas area, and we are finding real connection between the culture that we are strengthening on the inside and how it connects to the brand message we communicate on the outside.
Wonderful. Great to see you, Mark, and I'm glad to hear that things are going well at Sabre. Coming out of semi-retirement, go back into the life of a full-time employee. I can relate. Next up, Priya.
Hi, I'm Priya Bates, and I'm president of Inner Strength Communication in Toronto. And my focus on brand has always been from the inside out, focused on employees and how they deliver the promise that the brands give. And I also was responsible for updating the IABC brand, so I'll take that into consideration as well.
Great idea. And last but definitely not least, George.
Hi, George McGrath here in New York, where I head my own communications consultancy. And we do a lot of work with both consumer brands and B2B brands. So a lot of my focus has been on protecting brands, particularly when there's a corporate crisis or an issue in corporate performance that's going to affect how people view the brand and affects their loyalty to the brand as well. So I'm very much looking forward to this discussion with the group today.
It'll be fun, and since I didn't introduce myself, I don't think, I'm Shel Holtz, SEMP, and the host of these most of the time. Brad Whitworth very graciously stepped in last month since I was unavailable, but I'm happy to be back with all of you. My role full-time is as Director of Internal Communications at Webcor, which is a San Francisco headquartered, California-based commercial contractor. I'm coming into that role. I've been there about a year, following 21 years as an independent consultant. And in terms of branding, what I spend most of my time there doing is internal branding and talent branding. But through my corporate career, had experience with branding. So we should have a lively discussion. I do want to let everyone know that there is an opportunity to ask us questions, and the way to do that is on Twitter with the hashtag COF39, because this is Circle of Fellows episode number 39, so that abbreviation actually makes sense. COF39 for questions to pose to the panel. And the first question I'd like to throw out to you is around the definition of brand, because I still get arguments over this. I still have people who work in branding who absolutely insist that the brand is the mark, that the logo that you see, the image that you see, that is the brand, period. And I understand that that's where the word came from. It is the brand in the Old West that they used on cattle to be able to identify which ranch the cow belonged to, but that's not how I've been defining brand for a long time, nor have I seen others. So I'd like to hear your definitions.
Well, Cindy, you go.
Okay. Well, I think a brand is something as existing in someone's mind. So whoever your audience is, it's what exists in their mind. And it's like the sum of all of the experiences and touch points about your organization or product that exist in that person's mind. And even if that person can't recall every single little thing they know, they have a general perception of what you're about. So it's not something you control. It's something that exists outside of the organization.
Yeah, I always call it the biggest piece of adhesive tape that exists in the world because it collects every experience. I also think it's a promise. And it's a promise between an organization and certainly its customers, its investors, its influencers, and the group that I'm most focused on, its team members or associates, employees. Also, I'm going to just tease Shell. I don't think anyone on this call should be branded as being retired, semi-retired, or partially retired, because we all carry the brand of ageless and awesome.
I would have a hard time disagreeing with that. In fact, Gina Pell wrote an article a couple of years ago creating a new category called perennials as a generational definition of people who, regardless of what demographic they fall into based on their chronological age, remain curious and active and apt to try new technologies and continue to grow and learn. So I do consider myself a perennial. Any other thoughts on the definition of a brand? I certainly agree and have always referred to it myself as the cumulative effect of every encounter you've ever had with the company, so that when you see the mark, all of that sort of comes flooding back to create what's in your mind about that organization, that product or service. Any other thoughts?
Yes. I always talk about a quote from an HP executive that really struck me when I was younger in my career. And it was, "The brand is the promise of who we are and how we deliver." And that was a light bulb moment for me this was about our people. It's about our products, it's about our services, but it's how we deliver that promise. And that takes us right from the values and mission and vision of the organization to how that comes to life in the customer experience.
And I think a great example, and Priya mentioned the most recent effort, and certainly it was true in the previous effort, when IABC looked at its brand, it certainly looked at it artistically, but I think more important, we always met a standard of looking at it emotionally, because a brand does represent the emotional connection between a stakeholder, customer of any type, employee, and an organization.
Which is why when an organization changes its logo, its mark, it's usually symbolic of wanting to create a palpable shift in the way people perceive it.
Yeah.
Right. Mark, you raised the issue of a brand promise. I know that I've heard people say a brand is a promise. I've also seen brand promise listed as a component of building a strong brand. Can we elaborate on that a little more? What do we mean by a brand promise? And I have to say, in the IABC Communication World article, they attached the word authentic to brand promise.
Well, I think that actually I'm going to go back to Priya. That is a way to put it. But when we went through the brand exercise several years ago with IABC, and it wasn't about the mark. I don't even know if the mark changed, but it was all about the promise. And I remember very well, and there was a lot of involvement of members, but it was all about what is the promise of our profession, not necessarily limiting it to the promise of our association. And it became that our profession, the promise we make is to create, if I can remember correctly, create platforms that enable people to be heard. And this was at a time when be heard was not as common a phrase as certainly we use it in everyday language now. And that became then summarized as the tag be heard. but it was all about the promise of our profession commits to enable people to be heard. And I've always loved that promise because it so summarized the power, the meaning, and the inspiration that I think our profession can bring.
And that has evolved to create connection now, right?
Yeah, one of the things that I have seen written about a lot, I have not actually been through this, and George, with your work with organizations and brands, I wonder, have you ever done a brand audit? What is contained in a brand audit?
I have not done a brand audit per se, but I've been very involved with clients in brand planning. And really it all starts with defining what your brand promise is. What are not just the benefits your brand offers, but what are you going to deliver in terms of a service or an experience? And you can look at the biggest and most successful brands for guidance. I mean, look at Amazon, which typically is ranking these days #1 in every brand survey, and it's all about delivering whatever you need when you need it. And they prove that every day by the way they provide their service. That's the most powerful brand communication they have. So it's more than just advertising or marketing messages. It's how you deliver the service. We do a lot of work with Kimberly-Clark with a lot of their consumer brands. The Kleenex brand, it's more than just the functional benefit of it's a paper tissue that you wipe your nose with. Kleenex is designed to be the gentle touch that's always there when you need it. Not just for wiping your nose, but wiping a tear. That defines how we develop the product, and we design the product in the boxes so that it fits into every space in your home. So there's a lot that goes into building the brand. I would say with any audit, whether it's a brand audit or communication audit, you're looking at sort of the gaps between the brand promise and our ability to deliver on. So, for example, one category where I think there's a lot of gaps between brand promise and delivery is in the United States, the health insurance field, where the health insurance company marketing may be, oh, we're here to take care of you and make sure you get the health care you need. But then when you go to actually use the service, you're always disputing them over a bill, or you got some issue, some incomprehensible memo they're sending you. So there's quite a gap between what we promise and our brand and how we deliver. And so any audit's got to look for those gaps.
When we went through
I've done several brand audits in my days, and it always starts with research, quantitative and qualitative research about what does the audience think you are right now, and then what are you delivering on, and then that helps to identify that gap that George talked about, because sometimes you can't always get to other places when you're trying to make a shift. So you have to understand where you're at today, and then develop your brand promise and materials based on that, and then try and fill that gap. And every decision that you make within an organization should be made with an eye to who you are trying to be in that brand.
Yeah, I always say that 75% is who you are today, and it's kind of your core, and 25% is very aspirational in terms of where you're going as an organization.
Yes.
Yeah, we now several years ago, I spent a few years in the hospital industry, and George, going back to your example, when the question came up, and this was a role of the combined marketing and communications, and the question came up, was our brand, the right brand, is often asked, and we did exactly what Cindy's describing. We went to our patients and those who were not our patients and those providers who were so important in directing people to our hospitals, and we asked them to define both the relationship they had with us as well as the relationship they wanted to have with us. And I think my learning from that was how inconsequential at times the naming can be if you get the other elements right. And so ultimately, the name of the hospital didn't change, even though a lot of people had started thinking that's what needed to happen. But certainly how we used the brand as an internal way to define what we needed to deliver, and then in our marketing, preparing people by defining what it is they would experience. And I think it was all about learning the relationship. That's what I remember most from that period.
in a lot of organizations, I think it's fair to say that marketing believes they own the brand. And yet, if they believe that it is their jurisdiction and they're not just the stewards of the brand, you can run into serious problems with other people in the organization who have an impact on the customer behaving in such a way or taking actions that are contrary to the brand promise. So how have you, in your experience, helped employees throughout the organization live the brand?
I'll jump in first.
Anybody.
This has been, this is just like my passion of life. I spent many years in the early years working on this very thing with the folks at Southwest Airlines, and we were really early in really defining what that brand could mean, both for employees and for customers. I think it's all about the precision of the implementation. And you have to just study and identify and then intervene at every potential touch point that an employee experiences, as well as every potential touch point they then deliver to the customer. And it takes a precision and a persistence that's unlike many things that I've ever seen. I looked specifically, though, at the example of DoubleTree Hotels, the original, before they started getting acquired. And their brand promise to employees was that we care for you so that you will care for our guests. And then they looked at every potential way that we could demonstrate to employees that we cared. And that was from the uniforms to the meals to the English as a second language training, all the things that we could do to let them know we cared, and then help them translate that in all the ways that they could demonstrate care to customers. So I think it's both, but it all is based on a precise look at the touch points.
Yeah, you're mentioning DoubleTree reminds me of Ritz-Carlton, ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, I love,
I think of the fact that we've had these ownership arguments on a number of places, whether we're talking about the internet and IT or engagement in HR and brand and marketing. And most of the projects that I've worked on and the programs I've worked on that have been most successful have been focused around collaboration and having the right people at the table working together and making sure that we all own whatever it is we're trying to accomplish. And it's exactly as Mark said, that the sooner we can align what we're asking people to deliver with actual behaviors and everyday experiences, that's when the magic happens.
In a lot of organizations, it's a very limited number of employees who actually have direct contact with the customer. I worked for a pharmaceutical organization for a number of years, and the customer, which was the actual customer were the people who bought the drugs, which were pharmacies and universities and the like. Our customer was the doctor, because they're the ones who wrote the prescription, and we had to get them writing prescriptions. It was sales reps who interfaced with doctors. Nobody else really did very much. So it's important for every employee to know the impact their work has on a customer and how that can affect the brand. How do you go about getting that message across so that it's relevant to each employee?
This is a really fun. When I worked corporate, I worked in manufacturing, and you think about the people making products, they have even less contact than like a customer service person. However, what they do matters to the customer, and we spent a lot of time having every employee understand what the products did within our industry and then what it meant to the next person. We were making products that helped to make computer chips. So, we were making the world a better place through computer chips. We put on events such as like a live game where we set up a big board where people walk from place to place and got to talk to actual customers in spots about what their products did for people and how our products interface. So I think through the education and helping them make the connection of what their little piece does to the end consumer is important.
Yeah, we laugh at Sabre because we're the most present company in people's lives that no one's ever heard of, because you cannot take a trip. You cannot fly an airline. You cannot stay at a hotel. You cannot rent a car. You can't make a reservation without using our software, because we're everywhere, but we're behind the scenes. And so it's a matter of bringing the customer in so we understand the customer. But just as you're describing, Cindy, it's as much our educating our people about what our products, our software means to the end user, and making that end user as alive in this discussion as the people we sell to.
I spent a lot of time working with retailers too, right? So whether it was a grocery retailer or a technology retailer, those employees inside not only had impacts on the products and development, but they were also our ambassadors outside, promoting our products to their friends and family, talking about it on social media nowadays. So I think there's an elevation of what the employee contributes to the sale of a product and the reputation of the company.
You know, one thing that we did at the Pharma in order to create a closer connection between the doctor and the employees was a series of approaches to getting them to actually meet individual doctors. It might have been a column in the monthly magazine, because this was long enough ago that we were still printing a magazine, but we would ask a doctor every issue, what do you like about doing business with us? What don't you? Where are there problems? What do you like about doing business with our competitors? And what don't you? And we brought doctors in for lunch and learns to anybody who wanted to come sit and ask questions. Anything we could do to bring these people to life so that they weren't abstract was top of mind for us in internal communications.
Well, the other thing is, in the digital age we live in today, you're getting constant feedback from consumers and customers via social media and online, which we didn't have the advantage of years ago. And so we were talking earlier about like who owns the brand. I think increasingly consumers own your brand. It's how they interact with your brand and perceive your brand. Consumers can be some of the strongest advocates for your brand, defending your brand when it's in crisis, if you're delivering on the promise. And that's a tough thing for a lot of marketing departments to get their heads around, because our traditional model is, well, we control the brand, we tell you what we offer, we send you a coupon, you buy it. Now it's like, well, we do all that, but the consumer's saying, I'm seeing all the other things your brand is doing. I'm seeing where your brand is involved on issues that I care about. I'm seeing how your brand treats consumers in real time when I see how you handle like a product recall or a crisis. So the voice of the consumer is very much there today, and we've all just got to be listening for it.
Yeah, and I think it also extends, George, to the inside. And one of the things, try to do is to think of our employees as consumers of work. Because when we think of employees as consumers of work, it brings us right into that retail mindset that focuses on the fact that everyday people make choices. And if you think about, back to, Shell, your first question of what is a brand, well, a brand guides me in the choices that I make, whether it's to pick that product off the shelf, or in the case of so much of what we mentioned today, to choose that place to work. And when we focus on our stakeholders as consumers, I think it drives a certain brand energy that can only make things more effective.
George, you anticipated something I was definitely going to raise, and that is the growing expectation among consumers that organizations are going to be active in addressing societal issues, in promoting social justice, in helping to address environmental concerns. There's a growing body of research that supports this idea that we've moved into this values-driven marketplace. Certainly the Edelman Trust Barometer a couple of years ago, 75% of respondents globally said, well, if government's not going to do it, we're going to expect that businesses will.
Right.
So how much does your corporate activism or CEO activism factor into how people perceive the brand?
You know, Shell, the 2018 Edelman Earned Brand Study shows that across the world, in all the countries they surveyed, from 2017 to 2018, was the biggest increase in belief-based buyers. So now the majority of all buyers are buying based on beliefs. So it's pretty important.
Yeah, and I think especially when we see certain institutions we all experience disappoint us, we talk about this a lot, that people do look to the private sector in our case as holding and sustaining and committing to values that we don't always see in the public sector at this moment.
Right. But if you think of a brand like Patagonia, for example, I think the people who buy Patagonia do it because they know that they're buying sustainable clothing from an organization that is committed to this. And there are subtler examples out there, but people are actually willing to pay a premium for a product from an organization that does embrace values that are consistent with their own.
Yeah.
There's this idea of brand positioning that I want to talk about for a minute, which I looked up one definition, and they call it the conceptual place you want to own in the target consumer's mind, the benefits you want them to think of when they think of your brand. This seems to be at odds with the idea that that the consumer controls the brand, but not really, right? I mean, if you're positioning well, then they're going to think about you the way you want to, and in that conceptual place.
And I think it's great that you have the positioning, but are you delivering on that positioning? I think that's when there's a disconnect in that, then you lose the consumer a lot faster.
Right. And any examples of that leap to mind, Priya? Somebody whose positioning is different from the delivery?
Oh, put me on the spot. Let me think about it. Somebody can type in.
I would say Wells Fargo, but they're such a convenient target that gets raised all the time. But
how about an example of where they're really well positioned? Think of Walmart. Sure. Walmart, the low cost retailer provider. They truly own that position. I mean, if you go to the Walmart headquarters, you're not going to see these glorious offices. In fact, their employees take out their own trash. You know, they make their business decision and their demonstrate behaviors based on that position that they hold. But I want to make one more point on positioning, is that it's not just important in positioning about how your consumer or your stakeholder thinks you hold that position. It also is a great tool to help you manage the competitive environment. So for marketers and communicators, it really does help if you can define your position very clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've got to come up with something distinctive. It goes back to your brand promise as well. You've got to come up with an offering that distinguishes yourself from the competition. I mean, look at Apple, again, number one in most, or two in most brand surveys of the last few years. Deliver elegant, beautiful products that work flawlessly. You know, they're number one across laptops, number one across tablets, number one across devices. Now, Samsung's doing great in that category too, but when you think about the leaders, they always deliver, and the other thing is they're always upping the ante. They're always innovating and adding more. Amazon is number one in that brand standings every year for the last decade, because every year they're making continuous improvements, adding new services, thinking of new ways to delight the customer, give you things you didn't think you needed. And that's the challenge for a lot of companies that are not with a lot of us who are not with one of those Apple or Amazon. How can we get that spirit of innovation going on in organizations and look to constantly deliver something new?
I think as well, like Shell, you asked that question, where is that off? You know, as a Canadian, somebody who's outside of the U.S. on this panel today, the one thing that's really been a disconnect for us is what we're seeing going on in the U.S. with our positioning and our expectation being democracy, and then seeing that disconnect with all the stuff that's going on there, and it's really got us really confused, and it feels like chaos because that positioning is so off.
And that reinforces the point that at the core of any successful, sustained brand is that the brand is reliable, whether it's my iPhone or my country. And I go back to Southwest. Southwest didn't wake up one day and say we want to be fun. Southwest woke up one day and said we want to be the most reliable. And there was a phrase we came up with years ago to describe Southwest, and it was, we're serious about having fun because we're serious about being the most reliable carrier, and that enables us to have fun. And I think that goes back to one of the pleas you made, Shell, for this to be a collaborative experience that doesn't get caught up in who owns what. I remember years ago getting a call from a fast food restaurant I won't mention who wanted to become number one. And I said, well, what is your most distinguishing factor? And they said, oh, we're the cleanest. And I arrived at a store where I wouldn't eat because it was so dirty. And I said, well, that was interesting. What did the operations people have to say when they were invited to your brand meeting? Well, why would we need them? This is all about marketing. So unless we're reliable, we can't always tell a story.
Yeah, exactly. There's a whole range of tools available now to support a brand. One of them that has been around for a while is thought leadership. The idea that you can take anybody from your senior most leaders to your subject matter experts and position them as thought leaders in the industry in order to support the brand promise and the core attributes of the brand. Is this something that you have used effectively, any of you?
Yes, and actually, it was very much a part of the hospital world when I was in that world, where we had certain causes that were essential to our brand, and one of those causes was the public access to mental health detection and treatment. And it won't surprise anyone that this became a very intense cause after what happened in Sandy Hook in 2012. And we felt, as the hospital closest to that community, that we had to be known to stand for what must happen in a community. And that had nothing to do with selling anything we might market. It had everything to do with positioning what we believed in and who we were.
I think that's something the unions did really well too. Like when I worked with the nurses union here in Canada, and really putting out our president, who was a nurse, and talking about the issues in terms of healthcare and workers' rights, etc. We had a very clear messaging and platform that we promoted her on.
Mark, I was going to say that also at Southwest Airlines, Gary Kelly, the CEO, although he has been used sparingly for this, when the time is right, he has exhibited some tremendous thought leadership. I remember when they were experimenting with assigned seating, and the population of Southwest customers just kind of went crazy over that. He stepped in, wrote a rather lengthy post on Nuts About Southwest, the Southwest blog, explaining what they were doing, but that they were definitely going to be listening. Ultimately, they didn't adopt that.
And I think it goes to an extended purpose that a brand can provide, and Southwest is a great example. A brand can, in its most precise form, actually train a customer, certainly manage a customer's expectations. And that's why, even to this day, we sometimes tolerate certain things when we fly Southwest that we would not tolerate when we fly other carriers. And that's partly because that brand has so effectively communicated to us what we can reasonably expect as a consumer.
So you raised an interesting point there, Mark, and I'd like to hear what other people think about as an element of that brand promise, setting those expectations. I mean, this is I remember, God, decades ago, when a company I worked for was going through a quality improvement process, introducing it and then trying to bake it into the organization. One of the fundamental premises of that was that quality was defined as conformance to requirements. And if you were building a $10 watch It was a quality watch if it conformed to the requirements for making that watch. But when you're selling that watch to the public, you're not raising the expectation that for $10 you're going to get a Rolex, right?
Or maybe on Canal Street.
So what about building expectations into the brand?
Well, I am always amazed, like being in grocery retail, about the fact that, when I worked for Loblaw, we had several banners and several brands, and every one of those delivered something different, right? Even under one corporate umbrella, and consumer brands tend to do that, where they knew that if they were buying a no-name product, there was certain expectation on price and quality and everything else. And then when you were buying a high-end product, you had a different kind of expectation. You were willing to pay more. So it's really about, that combination that we've been talking about, which is what's the promise that you're making, and are you actually delivering on that promise?
I want to let those who are watching live know that we have about 20 minutes left, and there's still an opportunity to ask questions. Just go to Twitter and submit your question using the hashtag COF39, Circle of Fellows 39, and I'll be sure to pass that along. One of the other newer opportunities for strengthening and reinforcing a brand is through employee ambassador programs. And I'd like to hear your thoughts about the connection between employee ambassador programs and the brand.
Well, certainly in the airline business, this has become kind of a staple. And the first one I was involved with was, I tease the people I work with. I started in the airline business, but the rumors that it was Wright Brothers Air are strongly exaggerated. But in the early days of my career, when I worked for the original Frontier, one of the things that we instituted is as an opportunity for employees to really enjoy the customers and get to know the customers was a flying ambassador program where you could actually, as an employee, fly a flight, and your job was simply to thank the passengers for booking their seat that day. And it was immensely popular with customers, but it was especially meaningful to employees because especially those who did not get to see the customer. And we put emphasis on those who were behind the scenes to get to experience that. And it means the world to people.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, when I was at, in consumer retail, again, we launched a loyalty program, but one of the things we'd always do is make sure everybody got a chance to experience it firsthand. So when we were rolling out a program in a store, the employees signed up 2 weeks before a customer could. They got to test the program, they got to experience it, they got messaging and education on the program, so that when it came to life in that market, they knew everything they needed to know. And it's really interesting, years later, not working for the company anymore, hearing those cashiers and hearing those workers, the staff in the stores talk about that same program, and they do it from a first person perspective.
Right.
And I think, Shell, this question shows, we're in just a profession where walls are coming down left and right. And I think one of the things that I'm just sensing more of, and we certainly talk about where I am today, is how do we make the experience we create for our people, the culture we build for our people, a key part of the brand messaging we communicate on the outside. It's kind of like my example is always, I always wanted to buy Keebler cookies because I believed that there were elves. And I think in many ways, what happens on the inside does influence how a customer will, if not a perception of the product, certainly the values of the organization that created it. And I just see more examples of that all the time.
Yeah, and technology is enabling some of that. I'll give you an example. This is not an ambassador example, but one where technology has enabled a tighter connection with the brand. I decided to try one of the companies where they're going to make your clothes from scratch after you use their mobile app.
It scares me to death.
Oh, I got to tell you, the most comfortable shirts I've ever owned. It is perfect. I'm going to try pants next. But after I went through the measuring process and placed my order, 3 days later, I got an email telling me that the fabric had been cut and it was being sent on over to the people who were going to stitch it all together. So they kept me up to date during the steps of the process. Another one that I read about was a company that makes custom jewelry. And when you order the jewelry through your messaging app, they'll send you a photo of your ring or your brooch as it goes through every stage. And I think these one-on-one connections with the customer can really build the brand. The challenge is scaling that, right?
And automating it, right? In some cases, I imagine that's part of the process for those organizations. But I know that, we think about the fact that, traditional marketing was about broadcast messages that we owned. And now we're moving towards that conversation and building a relationship. And that's ultimately where the brand can play a role, right? That it's a relationship we have with that organization that is consistent and we're loyal to over a long period of time.
Right, and I know that one-on-one connection is sort of the holy grail of marketing, and now we have chatbots that can enable that to some extent if they work as promised. And but one of the techniques that's being employed now by marketers, which worries me about its impact on the brand, is this whole notion of influencer marketing. The idea that somebody's going to get paid to share something over Instagram related to it might just be holding up your product. But we talk about, George, you raised the issue of the consumer is in control of the brand, but before influencer marketing, at least you were in control of what they saw. And now we're sort of abdicating this to people who have a lot of reach, who may misbehave either in the actual promotion of the brand that you're paying them for or later, right? I mean, there was the instance of somebody on YouTube that was being paid by a lot of people, a YouTube star, paid for his influence, and suddenly he was out there making racist comments, and all of these brands were suddenly being painted with that. And yet influencer marketing is the fastest growing category of
Can I make
marketing.
a comment about that?
I wish you would.
I want to take this back to a comment made by Mark Schumann in a previous Circle of Fellows that I have up on my whiteboard here that says, we are not in a content mode, we are in a relationship mode. And I think, those connections and relationships are what people want today. And they trust getting information from people that they already have a relationship with. Yeah. So I think that influencer marketing is really important. And if you, in the past, think you had spokespeople that could do the same thing as the influencer marketers, and you still really weren't in control of all of the perceptions that people had of your brand. So the relationship is the important piece today.
And Cindy, I'm going to add to your art collection by sending you something to put in front of that statement. Okay. But I think, Shell, that this may be an extension of what used to exist in fiction and is now in however we want to define reality. I mean, we had Mr. Whipple and the Charmin. We had Mrs. Olson and the Folgers coffee. We can go through years of brands creating these characters we would trust. We had Josephine the plumber, and I'm really dating myself.
Remember Madge with the
yeah, and now we have the Kardashians. So I think actually Madge was more real, but I think that we've always looked for people we trust to endorse something if we were on the fence. But ultimately, if the product doesn't deliver, back to the focus on reliability, the relationship can't sustain. The relationship can't sustain a bad product.
Well, I think the point about influencers and influencer marketing too is that the big trend now is to focus on micro-influencers, moving away from the Kardashians and the celebrity endorsed influencers to targeting people who may just have like a few hundred or a few thousand followers, but they're really aligned with something you're interested in. Like if you're interested in edgy jewelry accessories, there's like a whole bunch of people who just follow this stuff themselves. And now marketers can find them reach out to them and say, hey, we've got some great products from our client. We'd like you to take a look at it. If you want to share it, share it. We can work out some compensation on it as well. So I think we're moving away. We're moving away from those big celebrity endorsers and more to people like me who share my interest and recommend things that I'm interested in. It doesn't protect us from the thing that Shell mentioned, which is what if they go off and do something else that's controversial or conflicts with your brand? And that's where I think there's a lot of people now who help you find these folks who've also got ways of vetting those people so that you have some degree of brand safety around.
Yeah, brand safety is a term that we hear a lot these days, particularly when it comes to programmatic buying, where your ad just shows up and you aren't aware that it's being, for example, made the pre-roll on a YouTube video from an offensive creator. So that has emerged as an entire category, brand safety.
Well, and that's why a lot of the media buying now is coming in-house to the client side, because they want to control that process more.
I was also going to say the other advantage of micro-influencers is that a Khloe Kardashian, for example, is not interacting a lot with her, millions of followers, but a micro-influencer with maybe 1,000 followers probably is. So you do have that tighter connection between that influencer and the people who are interested in what he or she has to say.
Well, and going back to where we started the conversation about brands and authenticity, they're authentic people commenting on something that they're really interested in. They're obsessive about some thing that you can buy or use or play with, and it's real. As opposed to, celebrity endorsers. I love movie stars, but, Bruce Willis will endorse anything you write a check for. Nothing against Bruce or any other celebrity endorser, but, I think we all recognize that they're paid. Now, the micro-influencers are getting paid too, but they'd be doing a lot of this stuff anyway, whether they're getting paid or not.
And I guess there's an expectation now from the consumer of full disclosure, right? That it's no longer this Coke ends up in the shot, but they have to actually say this is an ad and I've been paid for this.
Yeah, I just read an article that was the influencer next door, somebody who might be just getting like free shampoo in order to share that Instagram photo. But, there is another type of influencer that has emerged lately. When we talk about the authenticity of the brand, it worries me. These are faux influencers. They don't actually exist. They have been created by an AI, and people are following them. I guess Captain Morgan is something of a faux influencer. But when you're trying to foist somebody off as real who's not, even if you're disclosing it somewhere, people won't notice that. I have to say, this is, to me, social media gone full circle from that original promise of authenticity to, the most inauthentic spokesperson that you can possibly imagine.
Well, maybe that's why participation in a lot of social media, or Facebook in particular, is down.
Yeah.
It's we're getting away from sharing stuff with friends and family to, seeing all kinds of marketing crap.
Yeah, we're moving to messaging apps where you have tighter control over the network of people that you're engaging with, and I think that's a challenge for people too, is to convey the brand and the brand promise where you don't have that ability to distribute over a mass audience. Let's talk about something else that bothers me a lot about organizations and how it affects their brands, and that is a lot of companies that treat their prospects and their new customers better than their existing customers. You think, for example, about your cable, where you're paying $79, and after 2 years, suddenly your price goes up, but a new customer has access to this premium price. Magazine subscriptions. Right? If I unsubscribe and resubscribe, I can get it for that first year offer of $39, but afterwards, it's $189. And I read a book. I don't know if you're all familiar with David Meerman Scott, who wrote the New Rules for Marketing and PR. He and Brian Halligan, the CEO of HubSpot, wrote a book called Marketing Secrets of the Grateful Dead. They are both hardcore fans, but they were talking about this and said, well, there's a book there. And one of the things they talk about is that if you're an existing fan, you get preferential treatment over people that they might be trying to attract to come to a show. You get first shot at tickets when they announce a show or a tour. Are not enough brands treating the people who are already in the funnel better than the people they're trying to bring into the funnel?
Well, certainly, the airline business, and I remember this discussion very well in the 80s when American created the first loyalty program. And I remember the wise marketing people at the now defunct Original Frontier who said, there is no brand loyalty in the airline business, it's just price. And I think it's something that this industry certainly struggles with, is what experience can I have access to as a preferred customer that I don't get as a general customer. And I think that's why we see more access to experience when trying to differentiate. And I think it's something that actually there's potential for any organization trying to grow to pursue.
Yeah, I think if you look at Ryanair, their CEO believes, and he has said, that Europeans will crawl through broken glass to get the lowest price.
And if you've flown them, you do.
Yeah. But then he disrespects the customers too, and that has caused them no end of grief.
But it was interesting, I think. Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, Mark.
No, I just thought it was interesting when Southwest, in that kind of the continuation of what to do with assigned seats, and the compromise was this approach to the stanchions and having a more orderly line, but your ability to pay more for a preferred entrance onto the airplane.
Early bird.
Realizing that once you get on the airplane, it's the same experience, but our willingness to pay more for the 10 seconds it takes to get on the airplane, and now how that is extended to the price we'll pay for where we get to sit, or even if we get an advanced seat selection. And certainly in this industry that I'm in now, we're constantly talking about ways to enable our customers to continue to personalize the experience. So maybe a moral of the story of brand is that the focus on relationship now becomes a real focus on how can we use technology to personalize the experience so that it still is and always will be all about me, the consumer. I don't know, maybe that's where this all ends up.
George, you were going to say?
Well, just I think tagging on to that point, the technology today and the data mining and everything else we do enables us to get a very tight focus on all of our interactions with the consumer, between the consumer and the brand, what they purchase from us, what they don't purchase from us. And so you can actually personalize and structure an offer that tailors their individual needs.
And the algorithms make that possible, right? So that they know so much about our behavior. I know that the loyalty program I'd mentioned, I get special offers every single week based on my buying. They know when I need, laundry detergent because they figured I bought it like 3 or 4 weeks ago and she must need it now, and they happen to time it just really perfectly. But it's like I'm having it's about the conversation relationship I'm having with that brand and feeling like they understand me, and I'm getting rewarded regularly for that loyalty. It's a neat experience.
I had a funny experience last weekend. We were shopping at the supermarket. I was at the checkout line, and we're obviously in the loyalty program for the supermarket, as I'm sure you all are. So when we check out, the register not only spits out my receipt, but like all these different coupons based on the stuff we buy continually at the store. The next customer behind me starts objecting to me getting all those coupons, saying, why does he get all those coupons and I don't? I'm like, well, you're obviously not in the loyalty program. The trade-off for the coupons is they track everything I buy. They know what I'm buying. They know I'm always buying this brand of yogurt that I like. So every time I come in, I'm going to get a coupon to come back and get another 10 cents off a container of yogurt. So it's the world we live.
We just have a couple of minutes left, but I want to toss out here what has been referred to as one of the biggest threats ever to brands, and that is voice technology. I have a OOGLE home over here. I didn't want to say it out loud because it would activate. I have 2 Amazon Echoes in the house, and if you buy through those and don't specify a brand, it's going to send you the one. It's either an Amazon brand or the one that they have the agreement with, because there is no search results of 10, right? If you say, ship me an 8-pack of AA batteries, it's going to send you Amazon AA batteries. And if you don't specify that you want Duracell, you're not going to get them. And as this becomes a bigger and bigger thing, what are organizations going to do to make sure that people choose their brand rather than the default when they just order by voice?
Well, I think it's interesting that 40% of marketers are investing in voice technology next year, in a study by On Brand. So marketers are looking at it, and I'm sure that they're finding a way to make sure that their brand is the one selected. Yeah.
And I think the other thing is in their advertising, be sure to specify, right? You're going to have to throw that in. We have 1 minute left, which is just enough time for me to let everybody know that next month, Circle of Fellows, episode 40, a milestone episode, will be at noon Eastern Time on Thursday, December 20th. It will be on the topic of demonstrating the value of communications, which obviously will focus on measurement. The panel will include Amanda Hamilton Atwell from South Africa, Mary Hills, Jim Schaefer, whom I was with. I had him doing some work for me just yesterday in San Francisco at WebCore, and Angela Sinicus, the goddess of internal communication measurement. I want to thank each of you for your time today, and also thank Anna Willey, because she is always there behind the scenes. We all just show up, right? Anna's the one who is handling the schedule and assembling the panels and making sure everybody gets everything that they need to be here. We couldn't do it without Anna. So until next month, thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.